Chaos overnight after the FAA announced the sudden shutdown of the El Paso International Airport's airspace for 10 days.
Airspace restrictions went up without warning. Commercial pilots were told to hold position. Flights were delayed. Controllers stopped speaking in routine tones and shifted to coded language. For several tense hours, civilian aircraft circled while military channels lit up with encrypted chatter. What the public saw was a temporary disruption. What actually happened was something far larger. Unidentified drones had crossed into restricted airspace again, but this time the response was different. This was not a law enforcement scramble. It was not a border patrol interception. It was a controlled military test conducted in live conditions. A high-energy, directed weapons system deployed quietly near a strategic installation in Texas was activated against airborne targets suspected to be linked to cartel reconnaissance networks. Within seconds, the drones were gone. No debris field visible from the ground, no explosion, just silent termination. And then the airspace reopened. Most Americans never learned how close that moment was to becoming a public crisis, because the real story was not the shutdown. The real story was what it signaled. For years, Mexican cartels have evolved beyond trafficking syndicates. They have become paramilitary organizations with encrypted communications, battlefield surveillance drones, armored vehicles, and trained tactical units. They study global conflicts. They adapt. Intelligence sources have warned that cartel operatives have observed drone warfare in Eastern Europe, analyzing how low-cost unmanned systems can overwhelm traditional defenses. Those lessons were not academic, they were being applied. Drone incursions along the U.S. southern border have steadily increased, not just smuggling flights, reconnaissance missions, mapping patrol patterns, testing response times, watching infrastructure, gathering data, each small intrusion building a pattern. Congress responded late last year by expanding counter-drone authorities under new federal legislation that allows faster engagement of unmanned systems threatening critical infrastructure. But legislation is paperwork. What changed the equation was the weapon test. Because once a directed energy system is proven effective, the strategic balance shifts immediately. And that shift did not happen in isolation. Days after the airspace incident, Mexico's Senate approved the arrival of a small contingent of U.S. SEALs for a limited training mission. Officially, the deployment is temporary, cooperative, bilateral, focused on strengthening maritime interdiction capabilities. The language is diplomatic, controlled, carefully framed. But timing matters. When advanced counter-drone systems are activated near the border and elite U.S. operators arrive in Mexico within days, analysts do not see coincidence, they see alignment. The Department of Defense has already been running maritime operations under a mission aimed at dismantling narcotics supply chains in the Pacific Corridor. Interceptions have resulted in dozens of vessels seized and significant quantities of cocaine confiscated. These operations rarely make national headlines. They unfold quietly, far from urban centers, far from cable news cycles. But numbers tell their own story. Dozens of interdictions, hundreds of arrests, tonnage measured in thousands of pounds. The campaign has been active for months. What most viewers miss is the structural shift in doctrine. For decades, cartel violence was treated primarily as a criminal matter, law enforcement problem, intelligence support role for the military, but not overt operational leadership. That boundary is eroding. Recent public statements from senior political leadership have reframed cartels as a national security threat on par with foreign adversaries. When that language changes, rules of engagement eventually follow. Behind closed doors, U.S. Northern Command has reportedly expanded operational planning scenarios focused on cartel leadership networks. These are not hypothetical briefings, they are contingency packages, high-value individuals mapped, compounds identified, logistics routes analyzed, strike feasibility assessed. Operational preparation of the battlefield does not mean war has begun. It means planners are ensuring that if an order comes, it can be executed without delay. Meanwhile, Mexico finds itself in a delicate position. Publicly, cooperation with U.S. forces is framed as partnership. Privately, political factions debate sovereignty concerns. Memories of past interventions linger in parliamentary speeches. Some lawmakers question the frequency of foreign military presence. Others argue the threat has outgrown traditional policing capacity. Because cartels are no longer rural gangs, they deploy improvised explosive devices, they conduct coordinated assaults on police facilities, they use encrypted communications and aerial overwatch during operations. Entire regions have experienced depopulation due to sustained intimidation campaigns. Mayors resign, judges relocate, local police departments dissolve. This is not isolated crime, it is asymmetric warfare inside a sovereign state. And that reality changes how Washington calculates risk. When intelligence assessments classified transnational cartels as one of the most immediate threats to American security, planners begin adjusting posture. Maritime interdiction increases, air surveillance expands, counter-drone capabilities deploy closer to critical infrastructure, special operations units coordinate training missions that double as reconnaissance familiarization. Every move can be explained individually. Together, they form a pattern. The recent joint maritime seizure operation near a remote Pacific island illustrated this new coordination model. U.S. and Mexican forces operated side by side, intercepting a vessel loaded with narcotics hundreds of miles offshore. Official statements emphasized partnership, shared responsibility, mutual respect. But joint operations also create shared intelligence streams, shared targeting data, shared operational familiarity. If escalation ever becomes necessary, those channels are already open. There is another precedent that regional observers are quietly studying. Earlier this year, U.S. forces conducted a rapid strike operation against a hostile regime in South America, executing a pre-dawn mission that neutralized leadership before defensive forces could mobilize. It was swift, coordinated, over before sunrise. That operation demonstrated capability, not intention. Cartel leadership understands the distinction. They monitor geopolitical developments closely. They adapt to law enforcement pressure by shifting routes, diversifying income streams, and experimenting with new technologies. The drone incident near Texas was not the first incursion. It was the first public demonstration that the United States is willing to counter such incursions with military-grade tools. And that matters, because once one side reveals a capability, the other side recalculates. The coming weeks will test whether current operations remain confined to maritime interdictions and training missions, or whether further escalation occurs. Tariff leverage, diplomatic negotiations, intelligence exchanges, all of it intersects with the evolving security posture. For now, officials insist there is no immediate threat to commercial aviation, no declared cross-border strike campaign, no formal shift into open conflict. But beneath those assurances, preparations continue. Air defense systems refine tracking protocols, special operations planners update target assessments, legislative frameworks expand engagement authority, joint task forces rehearse contingency responses. The airspace reopened, flights resumed, headlines moved on, but the message was delivered. The era of unchecked cartel drone surveillance over American territory may be closing, and if both sides continue preparing at this pace, the next escalation may not begin with a public announcement. It may begin, once again, before sunrise. If escalation comes, it will not look like the wars Americans remember. There will be no formal declaration, no televised address announcing the start of hostilities. Instead, it will unfold through a sequence of calibrated actions that blur the line between law enforcement and warfare. Already, intelligence units are expanding persistent surveillance along key transit corridors that stretch from the Pacific coastline through northern Mexico and towards the U.S. border. Signals interception has intensified. Financial tracking units are mapping shell companies and cryptocurrency funnels tied to cartel leadership. What used to require months of interagency coordination is now handled through integrated task forces operating in real time. The objective is not symbolic, it is structural dismantlement. Cartels thrive on redundancy. If one shipment is intercepted, another route compensates. If one leader is captured, a lieutenant steps forward. The only way to fracture that model is synchronized disruption. Maritime seizures paired with financial freezes, drone neutralization paired with leadership targeting, supply chain interdiction paired with psychological pressure. That synchronization is what planners have been building towards. Along the southern border, new counter-unmanned aerial protocols are being layered into existing defense systems. Customs and Border Patrol units have received additional authority to disable aerial threats that approach sensitive infrastructure. National Guard elements coordinate more closely with federal agencies. Training exercises simulate scenarios in which drone swarms test perimeter response times. Cartels are watching these adaptations carefully. Some factions have reportedly shifted to lower-altitude flight paths, attempting to exploit terrain masking. Others experiment with launching drones from mobile platforms to complicate tracking. There are even indications that encrypted relay networks are being used to prevent remote signal takeover. Every innovation forces a countermeasure. Every countermeasure accelerates the cycle. Meanwhile, the presence of American